This part of the discussion is going to talk about events that have not been covered in the TV show yet, and some that are speculation of things to come in the future. So fair warning to people who've only watched the show, spoilers are ahead. So let's talk about the Messianic archetype. You know, Messianic, Christ-like, a character of mysterious or miraculous birth whose coming was foreseen by an ancient prophecy and whose destiny is to rid the world of an evil force. This type of character has been pretty popular in fiction over the past few thousand years, for obvious reasons, and while there isn't really criteria that needs to be met for the character to be considered Christ-like, there are a number of factors to consider, and depending on the author, the character might adhere strictly or loosely to the Messianic archetype. In addition to the things mentioned above, they may have a group of followers, some of whom might betray them in some way. Above all else, something that is most identifiable with a Messianic character is that they will die and be resurrected, oftentimes more powerful than ever, or with a newfound understanding or knowledge. We talked a lot about the three-act structure and the end of the second act in the previous video, and in a story with the hero of a Messianic archetype, the death is most definitely the end of the second act. I mean, it usually doesn't get any lower than that. This doesn't need to be a literal death. Something may happen that puts him out of commission for a long period of time. Link falls into a sleep for 7 years and wakes up as an adult, able to wield the Master Sword as well as more powerful weapons. Simba goes into exile and returns with an understanding that he can't run from his past. Oliver Queen becomes stranded on an island for 5 years and is presumed dead, coming back both stronger, but also not a spoiled trust fund shithead. But often they do literally die and are magically resurrected. The Winchester brothers and Optimus Prime suffer from chronic death disorder. Chrono gets vaporized and is brought back thanks to time travel, but the person who takes the cake for the death and resurrection trope is Goku, who in literally every story arc is either dead or otherwise unavailable, and when he finally does show up, he often has learned a new ability or has done a bunch of push-ups making him stronger than before. So what does all of this have to do with the Song of Ice and Fire? Well, at the very least we know that there are at least two messianic prophecies that exist in the world, Azor Ahai and the Prince Who is Promised. Azor Ahai is the hero of the followers of the Red God. Apparently he was the one who saved the world from the others during the Long Night thousands of years ago, and when he died it was prophesied that he would be reborn and save the world again. The Prince Who is Promised is a much less clear prophecy. We know that Rhaegar Targaryen, Dany's brother, read about it and became convinced that it was him. When he realized that it wasn't him, he became determined to birth him. Besides that, we don't really know much. Dany sees in the House of the Undying Rhaegar holding his newborn son Aegon, saying that he was the prince that was promised and that his was the Song of Ice and Fire, meaning that the prophecy somehow is connected to the name of the series, which seems to lend to the fact that it's a pretty important prophecy. As far as these two prophecies, it's also possible that these are two different interpretations of the same prophecy, and that Azor Ahai and the prince that were promised is the same person. Melisandre seems to use the terms interchangeably. So who is Azor Ahai and the prince that was promised? Melisandre seems to think it's Stannis, so much so that she seems completely oblivious when she's being told otherwise. I think it's been painfully obvious from the beginning that Stannis is not Azor Ahai, and Mr. Aemon mentions at one point how his glowing red sword, that is supposed to be the legendary glowing hot sword Lightbringer, is actually cold. The sword is wrong. She has to know that. Light without heat. An empty glamour. The sword is wrong, and the false light can only lead us deeper into darkness. This seems to lead to the idea that Melisandre was so desperate to believe that Stannis was the one, she tried to manufacture the prophecy. And a running theme of the series is the idea that prophecies are not always literal and can easily be misinterpreted. We don't really get much perspective of any of this until we get a chapter from her perspective in A Dance with Dragons, and that chapter is what made me completely convinced that Jon was Azor Ahai. In the chapter, Stannis has marched to Winterfell and there hasn't been word from him for a while. She becomes frustrated when she looks into her fires and asks to see Azor Ahai, but all she saw was snow. If you're just reading quickly, you might think that she's frustrated because she isn't seeing anyone and just seeing the snows of winter, but the S is capitalized. It's a pretty clever trick, but it seems to lend to the idea that she was actually seeing Jon when she was asking to see Azor Ahai. But she has this tunnel vision, being completely convinced that it's Stannis, that she doesn't see what she's blatantly being hit over the head with, that Jon is Azor Ahai. Azor Ahai is the messianic figure of the predominant monotheistic religion in the world, so what I'm saying is that Jon Snow is literally the Jesus Christ of the world of Ice and Fire. What makes all of this important is that if you have a messianic character, it's probably a safe bet to say that he is the main character. It's hard to have a character that overshadows a character with a messianic archetype. So if Jon is Azor Ahai, and as a result a messianic character, he's probably the main character. It also gives us a basis to speculate on Jon's fate through the rest of the series. So now it's time for random and mass speculation. Jon seems to be a character that pretty strictly adheres to the Messianic archetype. Mysterious or miraculous birth? Yep. Coming foretold in a prophecy? Check. Having followers? Well, he's the leader of the Night's Watch after all. Betrayed by his followers? Definitely. As I said in the previous video, I think that the series as a whole has reached the end of its Act 2. which is the main character's lowest point in the series, and the last time we saw John, he wasn't really in great shape. He was betrayed by his followers in the Night's Watch and stabbed a bunch. So the big question remains, is John dead? Because of his strict adherence to the archetype, I find it unlikely that he's just going to be seriously injured and need to recover from his wounds. It's much more likely that he's going to be dead, or at least presumed dead, depending on your definition of what dead means. We had an entire prologue chapter dedicated to establishing the fact that a warg can transfer his consciousness into the body of an animal when he's dying to avoid actual death. I don't care how nonconformist you think George R.R. Martin is, he's not going to waste time writing about some random character to establish that ability if it wasn't going to pay off at some point relating to one of the important characters. Plus, Melisandre has a vision of Jon's face turning into a wolf and then turning back again. We also know that Jon is a warg with a strong connection to his direwolf Ghost, often entering his body when sleeping. Because of all of this, I think Jon is going to wake up inside Ghost with his body being dead, then in a Christ-like fashion he's going to be resurrected. A lot of speculation that I've read seems to think that Melisandre is going to be the one to bring Jon back to life, but I don't really think so. I think it's going to be a magically unexplained phenomenon, and it's going to freak people out. When is it going to happen? My bet is when they try to cremate his body in the ceremony that they do for all the people who die in the Watch. More specifically, after they end the speech and say, "And now his watch is at an end." Because then he can be like, "Fuck you, I served for life," and leave the Watch. Right at that point, he's going to burst out of the funeral pyre completely unburned, similar to Dany when her dragons were born. Not only would that be a more powerful and Christ-like resurrection to the reader, but it will serve as a big wake-up call for a lot of characters in the world, especially Melisandre, who is still convinced that Stannis is Azor Ahai. If she watches Jon literally be reborn in flames, I think that would finally be enough for her to realize that Jon is actually the one she's been looking for. It will also give little doubt to the other followers of R'hllor once word travels of what's happened. Remember in the last video when I said that Jon will have two hero's journeys inside the big hero's journey that is the entire series? Well, let's call the last arc that already ended the Night's Watch saga. Then we'll come up with some really original name for the second arc. I think his second arc will begin as soon as he bursts out of that fire. The goal? March south and unite the Seven Kingdoms so that they can fight and defeat the others. You might be thinking, oh yeah? Him and what army? Well, that's a good question. Let's think about it. Who are the key players in the Game of Thrones at this point? Stannis, Dany, Young Griff, and King's Landing, probably. Stannis right now has loyalists, Red God followers, some of the North, and wildlings. Dany has mercenaries, Unsullied, Dothraki, and dragons. Young Griff has mercenaries, Dorne, who have been revealed to be Targaryen loyalists, and other Targaryen loyalists. King's Landing basically only has loyalists and some of the North who decide to join after the Red Wedding. So what kind of army can Jon muster up? Well, if he really is Azor Ahai and bursts out of a funeral pyre coming back to life, then almost certainly any followers of the Red God will join his cause, especially if Melisandre is there to vouch for the fact that he's the real deal. The wildlings are also likely to join him, considering that he's one of the only people who seems to be aware of or care that the others are coming, the very thing they fought to get away from. And he's the one who treated them like actual people and allowed them to come south, and because Mance is still alive and is likely to side with Jon for the same reasons. Once everyone figures out who Jon's parents are, and come on, we all know the truth, and Young Griff is outed as being a fake, and come on, we all know he is, Dorne and the rest of the Targaryen loyalists are going to follow him, considering he is the true heir to the Iron Throne. As far as the North is concerned, there's a very important moment early in the series that happens very briefly and a lot of people seem to forget. Before the Red Wedding, while Robb is trying to have a son, he tells Cat that he's considering making a will that, in the event that he were to die without having an heir, would legitimize Jon and make him king of the North. Remember that as far as Robb and Cat are concerned, Bran and Rickon were killed by Theon and Winterfell, and the only surviving Stark child is Jon. Cat really doesn't like this idea, and the chapter ends with them arguing about it, and it's not really resolved. This is one of those why bring it up if it doesn't pay off type of situations. And I think that the will exists somewhere, and when it pops up and says that Jon is king in the North are definitely going to rally with him. Especially since we know that a lot of the northern houses that sided with King's Landing seem to be biding their time because the North remembers. Oh, and when Arya shows up, he's going to have an army of fucking wolves. Then we have Dany, who first, I'm not even sure is ever actually going to show up. Even if she does, I'm not exactly sure if she and Jon would wind up fighting. And even if they do butt heads, I think Jon is a pretty formidable force. Especially if one or more of the dragons doesn't make it due to Victorian's horn thing. Okay, let's do a rapid-fire speculation of the beginning of Jon's second hero's journey. I'll put a link to the Wikipedia page for the monomyth in the description if you want a refresher on what each step is. Oh my god, you're Azor Ahai. You need to unite the realm and save the others. I'm just a bastard guy, I can't do that. No, it's okay, I have supernatural magic and I'll aid you. Let's leave the Castle Black and head south. Wow, I've never been south of Winterfell before. Wait, my dad is who? Wow, I have a newfound appreciation for what Ned did and had to go through to keep me safe. It's almost like I'm atoning with both my real father and my uncle who took me in and raised me and dragged his name through the mud to make sure I wasn't killed for who I was. So yeah, I'm pretty sure Jon Snow is the main character of the series. We can try to apply the monument to other characters to see if they fit better than Jon. Dead, dead, dead. You're a tree. Arya doesn't really have a call to adventure or a refusal of the call. She kind of just goes with her dad to King's Landing and is fine with it. She does have a supernatural aide who gives her a coin that might be considered a talisman, and she's also given a sword by Jon, but the sword isn't really all that special, at least compared to Longclaw, which is Valyrian steel. Overall, she isn't really a good fit. Pretty obvious that Stannis isn't it for the reasons we discussed earlier. Sansa doesn't really fit either. If her call to adventure was to go to King's Landing, then she definitely didn't refuse that. Is her call to adventure marrying Tyrion? Because she did refuse that, but is marrying Tyrion all that adventurous? Speaking of Tyrion, he doesn't really have much of a call to adventure either. He goes to the Wall willingly and then gets captured. Is him not wanting to be captured a refusal? Probably not for all the purposes of the monomyth. Dany is the only other person that kind of fits the structure. Her call to adventure would be marrying Khal Drogo, her refusal being the fact that she really didn't want to. She has a couple of aides, the lady with the weird name Jorah Barristan, and she receives a magic talisman if you consider it to be the dragon eggs. So she fits the structure, but it doesn't seem to fit as well as Jon. Kind of like shoving a square peg in a round hole type of thing. So there you go. That's why I think Jon Snow is the main character of A Song of Ice and Fire. I hope you enjoyed the whole two-part analysis. I spent a lot of time on it, and I really liked the reaction that I got from the first part. So let me know in the comments what you think.